Hi, everybody. This is Loren Baker, founder of Search Engine Journal, and thank you for attending today's SEJ Show. With me, I have Kayle Larkin from Larkin SEO. Hey, Kayle, how's it going?
Good, Lauren. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you
Good.
so much for joining us today. It's really a pleasure to have you on, especially since you've been writing for SEJ for so long. So I just wanted to thank you in person for doing that.
Yeah,
And also,
absolutely.
I really enjoyed your YouTube videos about Google Analytics. So if you wouldn't mind, how about a little introduction about yourself, what you do, what you focus on in the world of SEO and Google?
Sure. So within SEO and Google, I help companies get insights out of their data. So rather than focusing too heavily on what their competition is up to, looking internally at what your audience is up to, because they leave their trail in your Google Analytics. That's why we have it on our websites to grab data and insights as to how users are getting to our website, what they're doing, and what is leading them to a conversion. So first, I start with analytics, making sure that it's set up correctly. And then we let that gather information and we collect insights from it um, to help with SEO strategy and content marketing strategy so that we can decrease kind of spend where it's wasteful and increase conversions.
Nice, nice. So, Gailey, I know we're going to be talking about bounce rate and everything later in the show, but as you come up, as you're discussing things, I come up with
Mhm.
questions. So I have two already.
Okay. All
First
right.
is, so you're setting up analytics for a lot of clients and stuff like that. Do you typically see analytics set up incorrectly? And what are some of the issues, or what are some examples of analytics being set up incorrectly and some issues that can lead to?
Right. So probably, well, it has to do with bounce rate for one of them, because a lot of
Mhm.
times people will have multiple tags on their site, and that can lead to multiple page view hits, which would then throw off your bounce rate and other metrics. So sometimes having multiple universal analytics tags on the site, maybe because they've worked with multiple different marketing companies,
Mhm.
which reminds me, probably the number one is that the company should own and set up their analytics account, not rely on their marketing companies to own that. Because then, when you do, or if you do switch marketing company, you should be able to retain and have access to your data, your company's data. So, making sure that the company owns and knows how to access the email accounts that their Google Analytics is set up with, making sure there's only one tag on your site. And then events. Events are not necessarily set up incorrectly, but really, really underutilized. Um, if you don't, it's like I think in one of my articles, I said it's like a fishnet. It
Mm.
only can collect the information once you put it in the water, once you get it out there. Anything retroactive, anything that happened before you set it up is gone. So you want to get it set up accurately and fully um, ASAP. That should be a priority so that you have data to know what is happening on your site.
Got you. Got you. That's really cool. Another thing you had mentioned that definitely caught my interest was looking internally as opposed to solely
Mhm,
focusing on competition, right? Which
mhm.
I thought was really interesting because I've worked with a lot of companies over the years, and a lot of them were like, "Oh, how come my competitor's doing this? Oh, how
Right,
come this site's doing this and we're not there? Oh, how come this is like,
right,
whoa, 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 let's focus on the roadmap
right,
before we start veering off in every like dog seeing a squirrel in a tree or something, right? Like,
right.
like
Yeah.
so, what from your experience, um, how practical is it to focus solely on your own data as opposed to other competitors? And do you find that to be beneficial? Are you typically looking at if competitors are going up and down? Because there's a lot of different schools of thought on this. I mean, there's a lot of copycat work also in the world of
Yeah.
SEO and content marketing, and people will see competitors doing this. It's like, oh, we got to write an article about that too,
Right,
or this doing this.
right.
We have to do that too, right? So, how do you lead the pack? How do you go? How do you break away from following the competition and leading the pack while still learning from a competition.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of, I use the example of that Spider-Man meme, right? The Spider-Man
Yeah.
meme where they're pointing and you're like, so that's what happens when you're looking at your competitors only, because then everybody is looking at what the other party is doing, and you get this, right, like Spider-Man meme happening, and nothing
Hmm.
new is happening in the space. So what you should do, what I help and encourage people to do, is looking at your data and looking at that user path. Oh, back up one more thing. So the reason why you don't want to do that is you can't say whether or not that article or that content is working for them. You just know that they did it. You just know that they're
Right.
ranking in the top 5 or top 3 for it. But you don't know if it's beneficial, if the ROI is there, like how much, what is the value of the users that come to your site through that page, as opposed to other aspects. And you are not your competition. They have other things, right? Your business should be differentiated from your competition. So you don't have the same audience. You shouldn't have the same talking points. And looking at your analytics data, if you go through like multi-channel funnel reports, you'll be able to see the path from entrance, from first touch point through to conversion or to goal. Um, and then when you're looking at that, you can start to see patterns in the topics from top, middle, and bottom of funnel. And that's where I encourage people to start, because it really
Hmm.
doesn't make sense to invest a ton of money in your content if you don't know if it's going to make you any money, if it's going to return. So start there. After you master that, then sure, you can go out and see what your competitor is doing, but definitely make sure that your content is having a positive ROI first.
When you're going through that data
Hmm.
in analytics and utilizing that data for a content strategy, can you also identify within that customer journey where else that content will be helpful? So, for example, we know that we can write something, place it on the site, get it ranked, and that's bringing people
Right.
into the site. But where else is it also useful, like social email, things like that? Are there any data points that you can find within analytics to kind of help map that out on that end?
Um, yeah, I see what you're saying, and I still think I don't have a multi-channel funnel report in front of me right now, but I believe you
Mhm.
would be able to do that. With that, you'd still be able to see, because the first overview report is mostly by channel. So I think
Mhm.
if you added a segmentation filter on there to look at a specific content topic, you should be able to see that. If not, the thing that I do to help companies expand their content, I do start with organic search because that's my main focus. But then
Right.
when you are analyzing the search engine result page, you'll see what Google is pulling in. If they're pulling in video, then you should probably also reach into video. If they're pulling in images, you might want to consider, depending on your company, other image platforms like Instagram or Pinterest or more visual platforms like that. So I think that would be kind of like dual touch points as far as data, what I would look at.
Great. Great. So let's get back to bounce rate a little
Yeah.
bit before I get us too off tangent here. So, what exactly is bounce rate? How do you define it at the end of the day, besides it having
Right.
like a funny name?
It does have a funny name, and it's a pretty technical calculation, which I think is where people get mixed up and confused because they've heard or they think bounce rate means someone came to your page and they left because they didn't like it, or it didn't fulfill their search intent, when really all bounce rate means is a single page session, so a single page visit to the site with no subsequent hits. And that's important. It didn't send any other signals to Google Analytics, divided by
Mm.
total sessions. So when we start to kind of understand exactly what that metric is calculating, then we can think, maybe it doesn't mean exactly what I think it means. Um, so, session, right? What's a session? A session is like a period of time of measurement in
Mhm.
Google Analytics. And the default there is 30 minutes. So, if somebody reads your entire article, they engaged with your page, they read the entire article, they liked it, um, 5, 7 minutes, and they leave, that's a 100% bounce rate. Even though they did read the article, they did enjoy what was on the page. Am I jumping ahead?
No, not at all. Not at
Okay.
all.
So yeah,
Okay.
that's the technical definition of bounce rate.
Okay, great. Great. So I'm seeing here in the article bounce rate formula. Bounce rate equals single page sessions, no subsequent hits, divided by total sessions.
Yeah.
Very cool. And now, how can that data be utilized to make smart SEO decisions on the site? Does this basically mean that I can add components to that page to get people to interact? Or does it mean that maybe if something is too bland, I should make it longer? Does it mean that that page is something I should never focus about at all? What are some ways that I can utilize that data to implement that into my overall SEO strategy?
Right. So the big takeaway that I hope people get from listening in today is that you can't take away anything from just looking at a generic overall or even by page bounce rate view, because bounce rate's going to differ. The percent that it might be will differ depending on what type of page it is, and what channel the marketing channel they came through. So in order for bounce rate to tell you anything, one, you need to make sure your Google Analytics is implemented and set up properly. Two, you'd want to segment to the marketing channel, because somebody coming through organic is going to interact with a page different than, say, Twitter. And keep in mind like the type of page that it is. And then if it is like an article blog page that somebody came through Twitter, for example, they may just be interested in reading that one page and then they might leave. So you might have a high bounce rate. That would not mean that that page isn't working. Like you mentioned, and going back to my first point, making sure Google Analytics is implemented properly, looking at that page and what is your intent of writing that page? What did you want to get out of it? What do you want the user to do? If you just want the user to read it, it may be worth adding, scroll depth tracking to the page as a non-interactive hit and using that as a measurement rather than bounce rate. If there's a CTA on the page, making sure that that event is tagged so that you can see and measuring whether or not the page is effective by the user's action on the page rather than the bounce rate.
Yeah, and you kind of get into that in the second point of auditing the site from a bounce rate perspective is making sure your events reflect business objectives. And you get into a couple of different examples here. Would you kind of mind going over those a bit?
Sure. Let me peek at what my examples are.
That's okay.
What did I say?
Do you want me
Right.
to
So
help?
yeah, sure. So informational blogs, I think I ran over that really quickly. But if the point of the blog is just to share information, then you probably want to add something like scroll depth tracking, or Google Analytics 4 has an engagement time session metric. I probably totally butchered what that's called. But basically, it lets you know how long that page was in the forefront of your user's screen. So I would encourage you to use that as whether or not it's successful rather than universal analytics bounce rate or page scrolls to see if people are actually going all the way down to the bottom. Now, if they aren't, if you're seeing super high bounce rates and you're not having page scrolls, you may want to consider whether or not that information is appropriate for your audience. So consider the audience and consider the introduction to the page. There's actually quite a few things. So consider the introduction to the page, consider the audience, consider the page aesthetics. Is it aesthetically pleasing? Do I know when I land on that page that I am where I want to be? Is there a whole bunch of pop-ups or ads coming at me that I can't get to the information? And does it take a really long time to load? Am I leaving because your site's too slow? Those are all things that I would look at if it has a super high bounce rate and we're not seeing page depth scrolls.
Very cool. Very cool. And you'd already discussed some of the other points in here, like looking at marketing channels, the difference between organic and social and
Right.
direct, bounce rate. Really interesting in this example that you shared on the SEJ piece that organic and paid have a 30 something percent bounce rate where direct has this 68, almost 70%. I'm always confused with direct traffic, as I'm sure most people are. How do you figure out direct traffic? Like, I kind of like, I don't know, try to figure out what percentage would be branded queries
Right.
on Safari browser, or what percentage would be this, or it's typical. Everyone always says, "Oh, it's bookmarked," but then it's all new users, right? So, like,
Right.
how do you determine what direct traffic is, and does looking at the bounce rate from direct compared to organic on specific sites or pages help with that?
I don't think so. I wouldn't spend too much time trying to figure out direct traffic unless it was an implementation error and you're seeing like the majority of your traffic being direct. Then you might want to take a closer look at it. Another way you could go about it rather than looking at default channel grouping would be tagging your campaigns,
Hmm.
and looking through the campaign report view. That would probably give you some more information than direct. But I don't
Cool,
stress too much about it.
cool. And I think one of the last things that you end the article with, and we had some mentions of this with the questions that came in. And just a reminder for anyone that's watching right now, we are live. So if you have any questions that come up that you'd like to ask Kayle about bounce rate, analytics as a whole, please feel free to drop them in LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, wherever. The last thing that you bring up is about GA4 and bounce rate. So is bounce rate even part of GA4? Is
No, you
anything part
won't.
of GA4?
I know nobody wants to learn a new interface. And I always tell
Mhm.
people, do you remember last year when Facebook changed? They changed their interface and everybody was complaining about it. They felt like, I can't get anywhere, I can't do anything. This is awful. And you don't even remember what it looks like anymore because we use Facebook every day. So the more and more you start using Google Analytics 4, the easier it will become. There are some metrics that aren't there anymore, that you'll probably be frustrated if you rely heavily on bounce rate. Bounce rate is not in GA4. And I think every analyst kind of cheered with that one. They were excited to see it go because they were tired of
Those
explaining and
questions.
having to report on it.
Yeah.
So, but what you'll see instead is engaged sessions, which I think is
Mm,
in um, it's a lot closer to what people thought bounce rate means. Engaged
okay.
sessions, yeah, so they are um, the amount of time, it's like it reduces it to 10 seconds. So an interaction or a hit would be 10 seconds instead of, let me make sure it's seconds and not minutes. I'm seeing a 10 in my mind. Yes, 10 seconds. I would
Yep.
say 10 seconds instead of 30 minutes. So you're going to have a better idea of whether or not somebody left immediately, a page view, or that interaction hit, where they're interacting with an event tag. So it's a much better metric to gauge whether or not somebody's interacting with your content or leaving immediately. Use engaged sessions and Google Analytics for.
So you're saying that just like the changes at Facebook,
Yeah,
just like WordPress adding Gutenberg blocks, and just
right.
like GA to GA4, we should get used to GA4 because it's here to stay, right? We shouldn't, you
Yes,
say we shouldn't be going in and trying to find that UA tracking and then put that in the
right.
universal analytics tracking and put that in there. Okay.
I
Okay.
do both.
Got it.
I do use
Hmm.
both because I'm a creature of habit too, and I will admit that there's some reports that I don't want to go in and set up and figure that all out again. So I do
Right.
use both, and I do like universal analytics, they're new users versus returning users. I think that report is still a lot better in universal analytics.
Mhm.
But another thing you can do if you really dislike the J4 interface is Data Studio and just have the
It's
better
true.
data, but pipe it into the reporting dashboard that you and your clients know and love.
Pipe in the data that you want. right?
right?
Or that
Type in the data that you want. Yeah.
or that
Make
you
it
want
look like you
to
want.
show. Yeah.
Exactly.
um, so we did have a question just come in on LinkedIn from David David Bullion. So bounce rate should always get paired with session duration to make sense of the quality of the page experience for the user, question mark. So should bounce rate always get paired with session duration to make sense of the quality of the page experience?
Um, here's the thing, and I think somebody had asked this question through the forum too. Let's see if I don't butcher this. So with bounce, with session duration, that's measured by the end of the session. And if in order to measure the beginning and the end, you have to have an end to measure the time between the 2 points. So a
Mm-hmm.
100% bounce will always have 0 session duration, not necessarily because the user spent 0 time on the page, but it's because Google Analytics doesn't know when the time on the page ended. They don't have the endpoint in order to measure the time difference with. So it's just marked as 0 because they don't know. So the answer is no. Don't use that as a means of whether or not the user read the page. I would pair bounce rate with maybe if it's a blog, like scroll depth to see if the
Mm-hmm.
user went down the page or not, or some sort of heat mapping. Oh no, that would be a click. Yeah, scroll depth.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Cool. So speaking of questions, and you alluded to this, we had a lot of questions that came in from the form that we send out
Yeah.
beforehand. Before we get into those, though, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for making the SEJ Show possible. Those sponsors are SEMrush, which we all know and love. SEMrush is basically the common denominator of the SEO world. So thank you, SEMrush. And then InMotion Hosting, super fast, dedicated hosting for SEOs, WordPress sites, et cetera, and motion hosting. So thank you, SEMrush and Motion Hosting. And then thank you, David, for your question, which came in. Kayle, we had a lot of the same question over and over again. And this question starts out with, what is a good bounce rate for fill in the
Mm,
blank? So what is a good bounce rate for e-services government portal? What is a good bounce rate for automotive dealers? What is
right.
a great bounce rate for bloggers? What is a good bounce rate for a SaaS company, career landing page, et cetera, et cetera? So before we get into what is a good bounce rate for this, that, and this, what is a good bounce rate?
Right. That's the main question of the day.
Mhm.
And you're not going to super love my answer because I'm going to say don't worry too much about bounce rate. Um, because there is no good benchmark. Any of those good numbers that you hear, and I did include a few on my page, it doesn't have um, a lot of information or reasoning behind those numbers. Um, People will say like 40 to 60% just because it's in the
Mhm.
middle. I say if it's rather than good bounce rate, right? You should focus on other metrics like events and depth scroll and whether or not it's leading to conversions. Um, if I will say this, there's no good bounce rate. However, it can give you insight still. If it's like 0, 3%, it may be your Google Analytics is set up incorrectly. So you'll probably want to look at your implementation. If it's over 90%, um, that may warrant some auditing. It may warrant you to kind of
Mhm.
dig through and segment to the marketing channel and take a look at the pages that have the high bounce rate to look at, is this a blog where they're just reading one piece? Can we ask anything of the user? How fast are those pages? Are they loading quick enough? Um, Things like that. So there's no good bounce rate. Close to 0%, make sure your GA is set up well. Over 90%, make sure that the user experience is good.
Okay,
Hopefully
so
that
there's no
answers.
good. Yeah, there's no good bounce rate per se. It's
Right.
all relative, right? But we did have a question coming in saying, can you simplify bounce rate versus exit rate? And then not only what are the ideal percentages, but if someone is paying close attention to bounce rate and exit rate, would a higher exit rate possibly indicate that people are clicking on CTAs within the blog post or not?
Right. So I think the simplest way to differentiate between bounce rate and exit rate is bounce rate we know is one page. They didn't do anything else on the site. And exit rate is just the percent that sessions ended at that page. So they could have viewed 2-3 pages on your website before, and then they left, right? Their session ended on that page. So that's the difference. Bounce rate, one page. Exit rate could be more than one page, could not be more than one page. If you're, and then the example that they gave with the could high exit rate mean that people are clicking on the call to action on that page? Maybe, but I think a much better indicator would be tagging that call to action on your page and seeing the event hits.
So if you can tag it, then you can track it.
Exactly.
As
Yeah,
an
that's a
event.
great way to
Yeah.
put that.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay, good. What are some other events that you can tag on the page itself? Because I've talked to people that have like tagged everything between like, social media shares, everything else, trying to like really track micro conversions, like what people are doing on the pages. So what are some things that you would recommend that you basically tag or track in addition to maybe just the purchase button, or in addition to maybe like a lead form or something along those lines?
Right. So that's going to be pretty dependent on the company and the page. And I think we go into that in the article a bit, just making sure that it's in line with business objectives. Somebody with like an affiliate marketing site is going to want to pay more attention to how long a user is staying on their website, how often they come back, and the shares. Whereas maybe a B2B is probably going to, maybe if they're selling a software, so let's say you're selling a software, you probably have videos where you're explaining the software or how-tos, informational articles, educational type
Right.
content. And then you're going to want to track maybe video views. Whereas in e-commerce, you're going to have a lot more event tracking because you're going to want to see all those micro conversions on their way to a goal. So whether or not they click like quick view, whether or not they click on different colors, whether or not they click on different sizes, or also may like sort of things. That's going to be heavily, just make sure it's in line with business objectives, and work backwards from there.
I really like that, because I do think that as marketers, sometimes we can be very lazy, right? And we'll be like, hey,
Yeah.
look, here's a report. Oh, the bounce rate is horrible on this page. We got to fix it immediately.
Right.
Okay, how do you fix it? Well, we're going to do this, this, and that. But you're not looking at a specific, a very detailed metric making that decision, right? Whereas
Right.
if I do have like the purchase button tagged, the size me up
Yes.
button tagged, right? So I can look and see like exactly what size it would be compared to other things. Maybe the reviews, like a reviews accordion that you can open up and read the reviews tag. Then you can get a much better
Yeah.
idea in terms of differentiating what actually needs to be fixed on the site and what's just a broad assumption, right?
Exactly. And it can inform, like you said, inform like A/B testing and inform your ads team also, because then you'll be able to see, well, which of those quick views, which of those colors of shirts, whatever, is most likely to lead to a conversion. So rather than focusing too heavy on bounce rate, tag those events, and watch how they attribute to the e-com or the whatever conversion rate.
Very cool. Very cool. So, in addition to bounce rate, we've talked about
Yeah.
some bounce rate myths and stuff like that. And you've really focused on the importance of setting up analytics correctly.
Mm.
What are some other like Google Analytics myths or misses that you see from time to time in terms of companies and or SEOs making those assumptions based upon what could possibly be wrong data, incomplete data, things like that. Like you talked about, maybe, you might have the same tag on the page twice, right? Or something
Right.
along those lines. Like, what are some other like common mistakes, common misconceptions when it comes to analytics?
Common mistakes or common misconceptions. Really, really basic stuff. So the tag being on the pages more than once. When you are setting up a Google Analytics, having like I see really messy views. You should have like a master view or your primary, your
Mhm.
main view, test view, and raw data view. And the raw data view you should leave alone. Like I always put in caps, like do not touch, do not
Right.
touch this one. Test is where if you want to make sure that it's working before you add it to your main view. And then your main view is the one that you use for your data insights and reporting. So the views can get really messy when people will make a view for everything. Like if they make a view specific for organic traffic, or they make a view specific for a campaign, you can do all that within your main view. Another thing that I see is like either no events or like way too many events, which we just talked about. Oh, this is a big one. When you're
Mhm.
thinking of conversions and you're thinking of goals, not everything needs to be a goal, right? A conversion or a goal should just be that business objective, the thing that puts money in your pocket. Everything else you could use just the event reporting for. But the
Yeah.
money in your pocket, the goals, and then with the goals, I tell people to look and think about it from a percent value rather than the total number value, because the total number may be highest for ads because that's where the majority of your budget's going. So
Right.
that's clearly where the majority of your conversions are going to come from. But like if we look at percentages, conversion rate percentages, and email has the highest conversion rate, just as an example. Not saying email has the highest conversion rate. Just look at your data. And if it says that, then you want to get more email subscribers. So then you're going to focus on how do we get more email subscribers? Because we know if we get them there, they have a higher likelihood of converting. So think about it from percent metrics, not solid numbers. And don't obsess too much about things like bounce rate.
And jumping from the bounce rate article that you contributed to SEJ to the
Yeah.
GA4 article that you contributed to
Yes.
SEJ. So your Google Analytics 4 article had over 30,000 reads, by the way.
Wow.
Really cool
Yeah.
stuff. And it's a 9-minute read. So 30,000 people read this. I'm not sure where we cut off from like what's a read and what's not,
Right.
but that's a long read. You've discussed a little bit the differences between Google Analytics, say Universal Analytics, or what we want to call Google Analytics default, Google Analytics 1.0,
Right.
2.0, whatever, and then Google Analytics 4. What are some other key changes? From what I'm getting here is that maybe the entire data set can be different in some ways in 4 than it is in previous instances of analytics. So would you mind getting to that a little bit as well? Because I'm really
Yeah.
scared of GA4. Like I said, I hit the back button immediately and I look for like, yeah.
Don't
So,
yeah, it's definitely just using it to become more familiar with it. And I will say that I'm more skilled in gathering insights from analytics and helping that inform strategy than I am with
mhm,
understanding the technical aspects behind it. So my understanding is how I'll start this is that GA4 is much more focused on the way that it collects data is completely different from Universal Analytics. So you very well will see numbers, the numbers will be different. That doesn't mean GA4 is wrong or GA4 is broken. Um, they are going to be different because they're collecting and measuring that data differently. GA4 is much more focused on users and
mhm.
events or hits, whereas Google Analytics 4 is more sessions based. So it's, in my opinion, I would rather know users and what they're doing on the site rather than visits or sessions. So, and GA4, what I thought was really cool about it, and why I encourage people to at least get it set up so it's running on your site if you're not
Mhm.
using it yet, because it does use machine learning to kind of fill in the gaps. Where universal analytics, you might be missing out on data from people using ad blockers and different browsers and devices. And Google Analytics 4 has machine learning to kind of help fill in those gaps and help understand kind of predictions and insights better.
That's really interesting, actually,
Yeah.
because
I
there
can't speak
is.
on the machine learning aspect, but
Mhm.
it seems really cool.
That is interesting, especially in terms of like filling in the gaps, right?
Right.
Like we were talking about with direct earlier,
Right.
it's like not sure what it is. Do we
Right.
do we lose
What do
organic
we do
clicks?
with this?
And they went over to direct, et cetera, et cetera. One thing that I thought was interesting that you brought up in this article is life cycle reporting. And
Yes.
you have life cycle reporting mirrors the funnel of acquiring, engaging, monetizing, and retaining users. So would you mind getting a little bit into what life cycle reporting is besides what I just read and
Right.
how it's valuable at the end of the day?
So life cycle reporting, those reports are going to be the ones that you're familiar with in Universal Analytics. So that's where you're going to see acquisition, so where the users came into Google Analytics or came into your website, through which channels, and pages is an engagement. I don't have it open in front of me, so I'm trying to go off my memory here. Engagement is going to be kind of your page reports. So what users were doing on which pages. Monetization will be if you have an e-com shop, that'll have your e-commerce data in it. And retention, this was the one that I do think Universal Analytics has more. I like the new burst returning user report and Universal Analytics better than the retention report in GA4. But that's kind of your where they come from, what they do on your page, and then which products they purchase. That's where you'll find that information.
Very cool. Very cool. So in a nutshell, we shouldn't be afraid of GA4. We might be in our comfort zone in Universal
Yes.
Analytics. We should still check out GA4. And then do you find that do you work with many PPCs? Like if you're on a client account, if they're utilizing you for SEO or analytics and they have a PPC, have you found that GA4 has had a faster adoption with other I guess digital marketing disciplines outside of SEO? Because I know like we as SEO sometimes we tend to stay in our own comfort zone.
Right.
But do you see people changing quicker within paid or other disciplines?
Not necessarily. I don't, not necessarily, but that could just be the aspect that I partner or work with people. I'm usually working with people who aren't using they know they're not using analytics to its full
Mhm.
potential. So I kind of help them get set up and start using it. But I haven't worked with a PPC company yet in GA4.
Great. Um, so I, I just dropped your Twitter and your LinkedIn in here for people to be able to connect with you on. Is there any other place they can find you online?
You did Twitter and LinkedIn, YouTube.
Yes.
I do
Oh
post the
yeah.
YouTube videos. I haven't posted any in a while, but I'll. There's supposed to be one every Friday, which
Sounds
I just walked
familiar.
through.
Yeah.
There's supposed to be one every Friday. And I show you how to set up Google Analytics, how to set up Data Studio, and then how to really like what I want it to be is how to get the insights and the information from your reports. Because even after you set it up, you need to be able to use it so that people's strategies and their marketing is well informed, rather than just kind of hopping on the next trend and chasing competitors.
So I just dropped your YouTube channel in here. It's Analytics in Minutes, correct? Is
Yes.
that the right
Yeah.
channel?
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
All the videos are under 5 minutes too. So I don't want it to be
Yeah,
this huge lengthy thing. It's quick, right to the point.
very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I love it. I was watching some videos. They're very and there's not like a long drawn out intro. You get right
No,
into it,
get right
which is
to it.
fun. Yeah. Do you do many Loom videos as well? I know everyone I talk to right now is like utilizing the tool Loom to do
Right.
videos and send them to their
Um,
staff and everything.
I do. I use Loom for the internal videos with my writers to kind of explain
Hmm.
my outlines, and with clients, I have some pre-recorded Loom videos to show them how to add, provide access to things.
Hmm.
So I use Loom for internal stuff. I think I tested it with one YouTube video so that my face is in the bottom corner while I'm walking you through reports. I was trying to create more, I don't
Right.
know, personal feel,
Mhm.
but I'm not sure I'm gonna keep doing that. It feels kind of weird. I feel like everybody's looking at my nose as I'm clicking around.
That's just us. Like, I know, like, I was reading a stat about it, like how much time on a Zoom call people spend looking at their own face compared to everyone else's.
Right?
Like, yeah. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Oh, we just had a question come in, and a couple comments. So this question from Sanchit is, can we filter organic traffic in GA at the query keyword level? Because currently the majority of traffic comes under not specified. This is a very elementary question, but I do get it a lot. So
Right.
is there a way to track keywords in Google Analytics?
There is not. They did away with that, gosh, like, towards the beginning of my career. I've been doing SEO and analytics for 14 years, and it was,
Mhm.
like, towards the beginning. I don't have the exact year in the forefront of my mind, but that was years and years and years ago that Universal Analytics did away with that, and that was for, right, user privacy. Um,
Right.
what I do, and I think there's a video on my YouTube that goes over this, is you can use that multi-channel funnel report I was talking about earlier. I should slow down. I'm too excited.
That's okay.
Multi-channel funnel report to find out those primary landing pages or those primary article pages that are assisting in your conversions, and look those up and focus on those keywords. What keywords are getting the primary clicks to those pages? And those are going to be what I call like golden keywords. Those are the
Mhm.
keywords that make you the most money.
So you can pull the page that's resulting in the most sales or goals
Right.
from your analytics, and then you can pull the keyword ranking for that page through whatever tool you might be utilizing, and or go into Google Search Console, which is like
Hmm.
the true,
Right.
well, there's less room for error
Right.
with Search Console, and there's less room for erasing your data, because I think if someone sets it
Yes.
up and sets it up again, they're going to have that historic data. So the Search Console, you can put in the page, and it will show you the queries and the amount of clicks per query that go to that page. But you won't be able to do like you used to be able to do in the good old days and
Right.
look at the keywords that had the most conversions and sales and everything else. Unfortunately,
Yes. Yeah.
unfortunately,
Unfortunately, it's not that clean anymore.
no, it's not. My understanding is that paid isn't as clean as it used to be either on that side. So, but
Yes.
Google wants us to focus on topics and not keywords. So maybe that's a way to do so.
Right.
The topics of the page versus the individual terms that are focused on it. And I did see a couple comments in here about how uh, some tools aren't set up to integrate GA4 data yet. That's probably coming, I would imagine. And to Kaylee's point, you can always take that data, port it over into Data Studio, and
Yeah.
then get something. I always like it when there are people in the comments answering other folks' questions. So Alan answers Sanchik's question that the nearest you'll get now is looking at queries in Search Console, which we talked
Uh-huh.
about, and you can also get search phrases from Google Ads and an idea of which of those convert. So yeah, the ability to get that PPC data and look at those keywords that are converting via Google Ads is very valuable as well, because ideally you should have very similar conversion rates for keyword data from PPC as you would organic, with the caveat that that is the same page that
Right.
traffic is being driven to. Because if someone has a
Exactly.
landing page set up, yeah, then it may have a higher conversion, you know.
Hmm.
Great. It's been awesome talking with you today. I didn't know how we get so deep into the rabbit hole within analytics and everything else. I have one more question for you. Do you solely focus on Google Analytics? Do people use anything outside of Google Analytics anymore? Like,
Yeah,
is Adobe still a thing, or?
there are people still using Adobe, and I'm gonna butcher the name of Matamo. I hear a lot too. Agency analytics. I think
Mhm.
people are using other analytics software, um, um, in Europe, especially now too, because there's data privacy conversations happening, and people are starting to look for other analytics options. I mean, Google Analytics still extremely dominates that niche because it is free. And Hockey Stack. I have to say Hockey Stack too. I send people there when when their pages change frequently, because then it automatically tags the events so that you don't have to go through and tag and change your tags all day long. So those are great ones. But Google Analytics, the suite of the products from Google Tag Manager to Google Analytics to Data Studio, and having all those aspects be free, just needing to learn how to use them, I think is why it stays as kind of the main company in that niche.
Awesome. Yeah, it's free. Everyone
Right.
speaks Google Analytics. I mean, for the most
Yes.
part, or at
Yeah.
least they want to know what bounce rate is. Like it seems to me like bounce rate and Core Web Vitals are the one thing that people always ask questions about.
Right.
What? How come my bounce rate isn't better? How come Core Web
Right.
Vitals isn't better? Et cetera, et cetera. So very cool. Also, before we sign off today, we have had a lot of folks joining from all over the world.
Oh,
So
yeah.
Francesco just chimed in from Italy. Greetings from Italy. Uh, Jean from Brazil, India, another Brazil. So very cool. I always like doing this during the show. And you're
Yeah.
based in Washington State, right?
I am. I'm in Washington State.
Very cool. Very cool. So are you following the new hockey team by any chance?
Um, so I spent my 20s in Chicago, and I was very much
Mhm.
into sports when I lived there. Um, and then I had children, and I don't watch sports anymore. I haven't been, no, but I'm excited. I'm excited for Washington State to have a professional hockey team.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'll leave it at that. Thank you for everyone for joining today. And thanks again, Kayle. I really enjoyed just talking to you, getting a better idea about bounce rate, about analytics, about some of the common misconceptions around bounce rate, and some of the common, I guess, flaws when people are setting up their analytics
Mhm.
accounts or letting their agency set up their analytics
Yes.
accounts and everything else. Before we sign off for the week, for the afternoon and the week, is there anything you'd like to drop before we go?
I don't think so. I
You're
thank you
good.
for having me. It was an honor.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. And for all of you that are watching right now, just a reminder that next week, typically about 5 or 6 days after shooting this, we will be releasing the audio version of the podcast, which you can download, and doing our video recap as well. Kayle, it's been a real pleasure. Just as a reminder to everyone, you can check out Larkin SEO. It's larkinseo.com, right?
KayleLarkin.com.
Oh,
Either will
I'm
take you there. If
sorry.
both
I'm
of them
sorry.
work.
Yeah. Okay.
Both of them work.
So KayleLarkin.com. And also you can connect with Kayle on Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. It has been a pleasure. I'm going to go watch some analytics and minutes videos right after this. And hope you have a really nice weekend.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Search Engine Journal Show. If you liked this episode, subscribe to our channel for so much more and click the notification bell so you don't miss a thing.